In my experience, new nonprofit founders kind of fall into two camps, and there's pluses and minuses to both camps. One are very much like you, which it's like, it's so intimidating. It's such a mystery. And you have a healthy fear, which you should respect, of charity regulators, including the IRS, because there are certain things that if you do them wrong, you're going to get audited and you might have to pay penalties, interest, and that means you personally. So there are certain things. So a healthy, maybe fear, but maybe just translate it
mine was
into
fear.
respect.
It's okay to say fear.
Oh, okay.
Well, I was terrified. It's okay.
Right. Well, but I think, through our work together, we were able to kind of turn that fear into respect. So as long as you have a healthy respect. I love that.
Yes. I love that. You're absolutely
then it
right.
Works. So that's one camp. The other camp are the people who just go for it and don't have any kind of fear or respect for those regulators. And those are ones, I help those people too, but they come to me and they're a total rat's nest.
You're listening to the Nonprofit Counsel Podcast with host May Harris.
Welcome to the Nonprofit Counsel Podcast. My name is May Harris, and I'm here today with Traci DeForge, an amazing woman who wears two very important hats. First, she's founder and CEO of Produce Your Podcast, who is the producer of the Nonprofit Counsel Podcast. She's also co-founder of the Podcast Professionals Association, which I'm happy to say is one of my amazing clients. So welcome to the Nonprofit Counsel Podcast, Traci.
Thank you, May. I am delighted to be here and talk about the things that I love the most, which are making an impact through nonprofits and podcast production, and really in that order, actually.
That's amazing. So maybe we can start start with a discussion about, this whole situation with podcasts. I have to say, I appreciate you so much with the Nonprofit Counsel Podcast because you made it so easy. You really did.
Well, thank you. Well, one of the goals for Produce Your Podcast is for us to do a lot of the heavy lifting for clients like yourself, because you are so busy in your law firm and in nonprofit counsel and hosting your podcast, creating all your content. So we want to make sure that the podcast is fun for you. And just like we get to do today is really get to show up, have an amazing conversation about how to make impact through nonprofits. And you shouldn't have to worry about all the technical stuff behind the scenes. I know for me, when I started my first podcast, that was my whole objective, is I pulled a team together because I didn't want to manage all of the details, that the crossing of the T's and the dotting of the I's to launch and sustain my own show. So I actually, when I launched my first podcast, pulled a team together. And swiftly after that, that's when I had the idea to launch Produce Your Podcast almost a decade ago for yourself and my own self, business owners who are really busy, but want to really leverage podcasting as a growth and visibility tool, which you've done an amazing job of through your podcast. You just celebrated your 1-year anniversary. Congratulations. That's amazing.
Thank you. Thank you.
And our team just really loves being involved in mission and values focused podcasts like yours. That's a true core value of our company. And to be able to collaborate with you to put all of this information out there and be able to help people like me who were starting a nonprofit and had no idea where to begin. It's just been such an amazing relationship this past year. So thank you for inviting me on the show to really celebrate everything we've built together.
Absolutely. So yeah, we just celebrated a year of Nonprofit Counsel. And really, I started the podcast in preparation for basically providing a lot of resources and guidance for nonprofit organizations, which I think one part of that was the podcast, but another one was the launch of my book in August of last year, which was How to Start a Nonprofit That Will Change the World. And now we intentionally released that in August of 2023 because maybe some of our listeners know that that's somewhere buried in August is National Nonprofit Day. Well, it's my opinion that it should really be National Nonprofit Month. And so we celebrate and provide additional resources to our clients and the listeners in the month of August. And we're coming up on another kind of release, which is the audio version on Audible of How to Start a Nonprofit That Will Change the World this coming August, which I think is when we are hoping to have this episode of the podcast available. So actually, I think we've come full circle to your point. Like we started it for exactly this reason, the podcast, and now we're coming back to offer yet more resources. So it's pretty exciting.
Well, it is so strategic and smart for you to record and release the audiobook version of your book. Your book is amazing. It's been so incredibly helpful for myself as I was starting to venture into with the Podcast Professionals Association. I have a co-founder, Jen Trepic, and the two of us together, we really wanted it to be a nonprofit designation. And we'll always be eternally grateful that we already had a pre-existing relationship. So I had a trusted resource to reach out to. But for those people who are very first starting out, the book is amazing. But with the trends in the industry in terms of how people are consuming content, you really want to meet people where they are. And what I mean by that is that there are people who are going to read the book. There are people who are going to scan the book, but really want more deeper consumption of the content, but they don't necessarily have time to sit and read per se. And so to be able to have that audiobook that's portable that they can take with them. I actually was at an event last week with someone, and they were talking about how audiobooks were just so great for them because they love to garden. And so they would be gardening and listening to audiobooks at the same time. So I think that your strategy of having the podcast, having the actual book, and then having the audiobook version is so great because you can vastly touch people where they are and how they are consuming their content.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. I do a lot of driving, and when I lived in San Diego, I was in commutes for hours on end. And, you need to be able to listen to something other than the same music. And so, downloading podcasts, downloading audio books, really saved me. And I actually then feel like I'm being productive while I'm driving. And it's still the same. I do a lot of driving now, a couple hours, each way, each week. And so my preferred, kind of way to connect and be productive during that time is to listen to podcasts and really great audiobooks. So I couldn't agree more. And, as I move forward with Nonprofit Counsel, I'm really also excited. Hopefully it will launch before August of 2025. But the real in-depth piece of Nonprofit Counsel, which was we want to offer webinars and courses and, so we can meet people who really want to learn more and launch their own nonprofit, or they already have started a nonprofit, founded a nonprofit, but they have questions about fundraising or governance or insurance or advocacy. And I'm so happy to, some of the partners that will be joining me on that, I've had on the podcast in the past, Dr. Lynn Corbett. I'm about to have Hampton Dorman, who's a fantastic CFO, on the podcast. And so I'm so excited for the resources that we can be able to bring to nonprofits, because really, the resources out there are sometimes conflicting. They are confusing. I think you probably experienced that a little bit. It's like, wait, there's 501c3 and 4 and 5 and 6. And what am I supposed to be? Right?
Exactly. Well, you make so many great points, and I was that person. So the Podcast Professionals Association is an industry trade organization, but prior to being the co-founder of that, in my mind, the only thing I ever really knew of was a 501c3. So that's where I started thinking, okay, well, we are going to be a 501c3. And it was through your resource materials and talking with you that I realized there's actually other options, like you mentioned, in a 501c 501c6. C6
Yes,
was what was a perfect fit for us. And another thing that you mentioned that I want to highlight is that I thought, okay, we're a membership-based organization, so we're going to ultimately drive and create revenue streams through our memberships. But because of your team, I actually connected with them yesterday. Complete coincidence prior to, and one had nothing to do with the other about us doing this interview, but I was connecting with them yesterday, and they're in the process of filing for our designation. And your team was so helpful because they were walking me through all of the other areas and fundraising. And this may sound like it's an unbelievable disconnect, but for me, I hadn't even considered that our organization might actually be doing fundraising events and what would that look like. I was just very myopically focused on we're a trade organization. We'll have memberships will pay. That's how we'll generate revenue. So even just having a person that's a consultant and advisory to really support us through the business plan development of this 501c6 has been amazing as well. And can you talk with me a little bit about, I mean, selfishly for my own interest, but also for those of the people who are listening to the podcast, what are the of the different revenue streams a nonprofit can expect? Because you're out there making impact. Your whole core passion is to really make a difference with your organization, but it does have to generate revenues. It is ultimately a business with a tax designation as a nonprofit, correct? So you have to really think through it as a business. And as much as I've done business consulting and advising and working with entrepreneurs and startups, I was amazed at my own self that I missed that piece yesterday in the conversation with your team. So I would love for you to share about that specific piece of nonprofit building and strategy.
Sure. So it's a really a common question, and there's a common confusion, really. So 501c3s, those are the traditional public charities. They have primarily two revenue streams. There are others. You can always have subsidiaries. We don't need to get into complex ones, but primarily two potential revenue streams. The first one is through gifts, grants, and contributions. So those are the GoFundMes. Those are asking your friends, family, supporters to contribute to your organization, write a check because they feel invested in your mission and your vision and where you're going. That's the primary one. The second one is fee for service. And it makes perfect sense when you think about it, but most people don't think about it this way. So think of the museums that you pay admission to. Think of a school that you pay tuition to, a nonprofit school. Think of a hospital, a nonprofit hospital that insurance companies are reimbursing for your treatment and you're paying as well. So that is fee for service. There's still 501c3s, but those are the primary revenue streams. And then as far as fundraising events are concerned, you can do that in a C3 very easily. Those are the silent auctions. Those are the raffles, which have a little bit of problems. I go into that a little bit in depth in my book. The one thing about a 501c3 fundraising event is a lot of times you'll have a raise the paddle or you'll have an invitation to contribute to the organization as a donation, right? And the 501c3 can give a tax deductible contribution receipt for that. 501c6s or 5s, which are fraternities, sororities, for social welfare, they too can have fundraising events. They can do golf events. They can do silent auctions. They can do all sorts of things. What they can't do is give that tax deductible receipt. That's the primary difference between a 501c3 and a 501c anything else when you're doing a fundraising event. It's just to remember that you can't ask for contributions and donations as a C6. So those are the primary ones. And then there's a whole bunch of other potential revenue. And to your point, which I think is so important, nonprofits are businesses. Just because they have that, and to be perfectly honest, that's why I named the firm, my law firm, the name I gave it is, it always bothered me that nonprofits were characterized by something that they're not, rather than what they are, right? They're for purpose. They're for giving. They're for the vision and the mission and the values that the founders and the managers are embedding into the nonprofit. And I think there's so much confusion about that because people think that nonprofit means you don't have a profit at the end of the year. That's one of my favorite myths, is you have to expend everything by the end of the year. And I hear that again and again. It's crazy. But at the end of the day, you're a business. You have to operate in the black. You need to have a nice little nest egg. You need to look forward in that strategy plan, the strategic plan, which is the same thing really as a business plan. How are you going to get where you want to go in 1 year, 2 years, 3 years? And keep revisiting that strategic plan. How are you going to do that? And let's be honest, the primary piece of that is where's the money going to come from? So I'm so glad that my team was able to help kind of guide you through that. It's more complex, unfortunately, than I think it really needs to be, but that's what happens when you're dealing with the Internal Revenue Service and attorneys general. They make everything very difficult because there have been some really bad actors out there that do things maybe a little bit incorrectly and criminally.
Sure.
So their eyes are on you. So it is complex, but that's, why I'm here, why I am so driven to, provide the resources to nonprofit professionals and to, give that guidance and try to provide a path through the missteps and the obstacles and the bad information that's out there.
Well, in a true vulnerability, transparent moment, I will share that I incorporated my first business in 2003. So I've been incorporated. I've had S Corps. I've had LLCs. I've bought and sold businesses. I've consulted with thousands of women entrepreneurs on startups of businesses. And I have always put nonprofits kind of a little on the fringe or off my radar. They're in the course of my 20 plus years in being self-employed and working with other entrepreneurs to help them grow their businesses. I've had multiple ideas for nonprofits, but I've been so intimidated. That's the vulnerability moment. I've been incredibly intimidated for over 20 years to actually jump in the pool of actually co-founding and running a nonprofit, because it felt incredibly, I won't say overwhelming, because I didn't even know enough to be overwhelmed. I felt very intimidated, almost a little bit threatened by that IRS piece, and not really knowing, like if I'm running my own business, I know how to do the accounting. I know how to file my taxes. I know how to follow all the rules. I'm very much, as you know about me, I'm very much a rule follower. Like, if you tell me this is a rule, I will follow it. If you tell me I need to do this, I will do it. And so the absolute just mystique, is the word that's coming to my mind, or the mystery for me of not knowing and thinking I was going to do something wrong, or something I was going to violate a rule or break a rule that had to do with the nonprofit, kept me back. It was a true barrier for me for 2 decades. And then when the concept for the Podcast Professionals Association came up, podcasting is just going through the roof in every area right now. But there was no industry organization out there for the podcast service professionals. There are a lot of resources and tools out there for podcasters, but nothing for the service professionals like myself and other industry professionals. And it was one of those things where finally the need for this organization overrode my intimidation. And that's when and then of course, gratefully, the timing of you coming into our business at Produce Your Podcast was just so, I felt like, okay, I have a trusted person that I can be vulnerable with. And so I'm curious, am I alone in this, or is this something that you find a lot when you're working with your clients or your audience that's, really consuming your content and just like a sponge, like I was, soaking it up? Is that something that is a hindrance for people to actually move forward with the nonprofit because they don't know what they don't know?
Well, in my experience, new nonprofit founders kind of fall into 2 camps, and there's pluses and minuses to both camps. One are very much like you, which it's so intimidating. It's such a mystery, and you have a healthy fear, which you should respect, of charity regulators, including the IRS, because there are certain things that if you do them wrong, you're going to get audited and you might have to pay penalties, interest, and that means you personally. So there are certain things. So a healthy, maybe fear, but maybe just translate.
Mine was fear. Respect. It's okay to say fear.
Okay.
I was terrified. It's okay.
Right. Well, but I think, through our work together, we were able to kind of turn that fear into respect. So as long as you have a healthy respect.
I love that. Yes. Then, I love that. You're absolutely
then it
right.
Works. So that's one camp. The other camp are the people who just go for it and don't have any kind of fear or respect for those regulators. And those are ones, I help those people too, but they come to me and they're a total rat's nest mess. I've had clients that filed their exemption application before they filed the entity. They filed and they were able to get exemption because they did the 1023-EZ, which is a whole subject. I think I went over that with Ginevra Williams in a previous podcast, but it's a huge mess. I have a client that's coming on board just now that, and it's a soccer organization that's been in existence since 1999. They've never filed any of their reports with the California Attorney General ever. So they got revoked by the Attorney General. And so I'm coming in and having to, fix all of that. And there's going to be penalties. There's going to be, at least, I said roughly they're going to have $3,000 just in fees to the Attorney General. So it's like things like that. If you're going to really be involved in a nonprofit, don't be scared. Don't be scared. You don't need to be scared, but you need to search out the resources that can help you navigate again and turn that fear into respect and allow people who really understand what they're doing to help you. And again, that's the whole purpose of this podcast. So, we're coming full circle. I love that with you, Traci.
Yes. And believe me, the gratitude doesn't even come close to expressing how I feel about that. I would love it. For me, I'll share what was so helpful. So I reached out to you and I said, I'm doing, a co-founder and I are starting this organization. We want to kick things off on the right foot, if you will. Clearly, I had that healthy fear, which you did help transform into respect, which I love that. And I think that's what everyone, if they take nothing else away from this episode, to know that that is possible to go from fear to get the knowledge that you need, respect that, and then follow the pathway to having a successful nonprofit, which is what you've helped us with so much. But I remember when we had our very first consultation, you asked me some really great questions. And I don't know if you remember exactly what they are. You may have that mental checklist in your mind, but they were so helpful for me. I don't know if you could even spotlight some of those, but when we very first came to the call, you were very direct and you were firm in a beautiful way, of which you were said, have you done this? Have you done this? Have you done this? And it was basically to rule out making sure that we weren't coming to you with a lot of complicated process. Do you want to share some of what those questions were for me? Because I felt like they were so incredibly helpful.
Well, interestingly enough, I don't have a checklist. I think so many founders come to me from so many different areas, and their goals are all different, which is one of the things I love about working in this space. I feel like I'm involved in so many different ways in giving back to the community. But I think, in general, what I want to see from any new client that's coming in to form a nonprofit is that they have that respect, not necessarily fear, that they understand that it's a long and difficult process, and that they also understand that it's not something that they should take on by themselves. They're going to have to put together a board. They're going to have to think about it as a business. You're going to have to think about the revenue streams. You're going to have to think about where your expenses are going. You're going to have to think about program and impact and media and marketing and sales in some respects, right? If you're that fee for service or membership. So you have to think about all of that, because I think a lot of organizations or founders jump the gun a little bit. They're like, oh, we just need to start the entity. We just need to see it. But they don't put any real significant thought into, well, what then? What's next after that? And so, I think in my book, I kind of address this a little bit, and there's a lot of pre-work to do before you even sign or file for those articles of incorporation. So I'm assuming that that's probably what we spoke about. But
there was a lot of, you were asking, I remember. So I will, so, and that's fine. I would love to share it from my perspective. So you were asking, very first and foremost, you were saying, have you filed any paperwork at all? Like that was, I think, one of the very first questions. And we gratefully, again, we had not, because we didn't even really know where to start. And you were very helpful in basically walking us through. I think the first line of questioning was basically to make sure you didn't have to undo anything that we may have done.
Yes, that is precisely it.
That's the feeling I got, was like, basically like, have you guys made a mess that I have to clean up, or can we just start clean with this? And so we were one of those customers, that our clients that had not filed anything because we didn't, again, because we just didn't know what we didn't know. So we didn't move forward on anything till we had our conversation. So you ask us a lot about that. And then you ask us also about how we wanted to be, I think, how we wanted to be set up as an entity, and really getting clear on that. So you knew, I guess, what to file for us, which was very helpful for us to clarify how, and then of course we talked about the fundraising aspect. I remember one of the main questions that I had, and Jen and I had talked about so much at length before we got on the call with you. And it was about the board and setting up a board, because you can have a board of advisors in a for-profit business, LLC and S Corp, if you choose to do that, or you can run as a solo entrepreneur or have a co-founder in a business like that. But a board is not always required. And so we were, both of us being solopreneurs, this was the first time we were coming together in an organization, first of all, as co-founders together. And so you also helped us delineate and talk about our roles as co-founders. But then also you were really helpful in talking through what it means to bring on a board. And I would love if you would share some of that information, because I felt like it took my fear and unknowing element of the intimidation factor of a board, how to select a board, how many people on a board, what does a board even mean? And it really just kind of grounded us to realize that that wasn't something that we had to have stress over initially or out of the gate.
Right. So, I mean, that is a huge difference between for-profit businesses and nonprofit organizations that want to be tax exempt, right? So for-profit businesses, I mean, in my law firm, I'm all officers, sole director, sole shareholder, sole everything. I don't have to go to anyone, which is quite nice.
Same here. Even my husband, not even him. Like, it's just me, good or bad, plus or minus. It all lands right here.
Exactly. The buck stops with you. And the IRS is perfectly happy with that, because you're paying taxes, right? But for nonprofit organizations, because you're not paying taxes, and more with C3s than C6s. I mean, the scrutiny on C3s is higher than C6s, but there's an inherent conflict of interest a lot of times, because you start an organization, and the first thing you want to do is be compensated for your time, or at least partially, right? And if it's only you can't approve it because you're conflicted. So you've got that problem. And then, they want to make sure that those assets are really, used towards the exempt purpose. And that's true of a C3 or a C6. So you have you're organized and operated for a specific exempt purpose. And there's just too much, kind of ability for solos to kind of forget that that's their purpose, not enriching themselves. So the IRS likes to see multiple people on boards. I like to see multiple people on boards because this is tough work. It's not easy. It's a lot of, setup. It's a lot of, teaching yourself how to operate something completely new. And it's so much easier if you've got other stakeholders involved in it and to kind of carry the load, right? So I think, putting that work in at the beginning to build it, I like to see 3 people on a board. I think a tripod is more stable than a 2-legged anything. And you can always figure out conflicts of interest typically with 3, as long as you're not all related, then you're all conflicted. But regardless, putting thought into who's in this for the long haul with you. And you were so fortunate to have your co-founder, because you were totally aligned. That's another thing you probably don't know that I was kind of testing is, when you've got people coming in and they're all on the consult and there's immediately some kind of diversion of vision, that's a red flag. You're going to have conflict. So then when that happens, I typically launch into a whole discussion of fiduciary duties, duty of loyalty, duty of obedience, duty of all sorts of things, because, one part of my practice it's actually my least favorite is board conflicts and disputes, trying to mediate conflicts between directors. So to your point, that's so important at the beginning, and I'm glad we discussed it. And you've reminded me that we discussed it at the beginning, to put some really sincere thought into your business partner. And this, you don't own shares, you don't have a partnership agreement, but this is your business partner or partners in building this new enterprise. So, putting that time in at the beginning is critical to the long-term success of the organization.
It really is. And I feel like too, and I'm glad you brought this up, because this was something that Jen and I had talked together about prior to really jumping into the C6, was, what is our compensation? I mean, we are very passionate in terms of for purpose. Like, we really see the need for this organization. There's a void in the industry for it. We know we can help fill it, but we both run independent businesses. She has her own full-time business. I have my own full-time business. And so it is a lot of work. I mean, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I mean, it's a lot of work. It's not really technically what people think of as a side hustle, because there's just a lot that goes into cultivating the spirit, creating the culture for the organization, all of the things that need to happen, plus all of the technical details. And we were looking at each other and being like, okay, we know why we're doing this from a mission and values perspective, but it's like, why are we doing this from a compensation perspective? And how does that even work? That was one of our biggest questions for you, was how does the compensation for the co-founders work? Because we will obviously want to be funneling and channeling everything that we can, resources, back into growing the organization. But no one really wants to work for free, whether it's for-profit or nonprofit. So talk a little bit about how to establish that criteria or those parameters for compensation for co-founders or founder.
Right. So, I mean, the thing is, you only have so many hours in a day, right? And I have a lot of founders, especially for C6s. I mean, you're establishing a business league, which means you're involved in the business. So you're inherently limited on your time. So at the end of the day, what you want to make sure is that you're a good fiduciary of the assets of the organization. And for C3s, those are public assets. For C6s, those are your member assets. So you owe fiduciary duties to the public, you owe fiduciary duties to your members. So you want to make sure that compensation is reasonable. You want to make sure that it's approved by a disinterested majority of the board. That's best practice. In C3s, you're required to, but it's just best practice. So when you're thinking of numbers, I mean, it comes down to a numbers game, really, at the beginning, which is you need to have enough independent directors on your board to authorize payment of compensation to an insider, which as a founder and a board member, you are. So, I also like odd numbers. So in the case of you and your founder, you're not related, you're not married, you're just good friends and partners in this endeavor.
Business associates, yes.
Right. So if you both want to be compensated, really you need another 3 people. You need 2 technically, but you need a disinterest. So when they're talking about your compensation, for example, you have to take yourself out of that. You're like, I have an interest in being compensated for the time that I'm giving.
Yes.
I think it's reasonable. I think this is right. But then you recuse yourself from the conversation and setting your compensation. And then you have other people able to do that. To authorize it and to carry it as a majority, right? A majority decision of the board. Now, C3s have a little bit more scrutiny about excessive executive compensation. Now, they do pay attention to C6s too, but the C3s, because it's public funds, the IRS and charity regulators, attorneys general, really don't want to make sure that, you're bringing in $1 million a year and you're paying yourself $950,000.
Oh my gosh.
That kind of thing. So what the IRS has put together is basically what the board is required to do is to basically look around look around at other nonprofits in your area, geographically and niche, like who you're serving, what you're doing, and look at their revenue around what yours is and see what their executives are paid and their top executives. And it's all public information. It's on the 990 filing. Even a C6 does a 990 filing. So you can pull that information. And so then you chart that out. And as long as the board looks at that and can say, based on the job description and the responsibilities and the work that is being put in here, we believe this is reasonable. And we're using this data to peg that. If they do that, what that does is it creates a rebuttable presumption that the burden of proof to prove that it's unreasonable is now on the Internal Revenue Service or a charity regulator. If you don't do that, then the burden is on the organization to prove reasonableness. And that's a really heavy burden. So when you're setting the executive compensation of your top executive, you want to do this if you're a nonprofit. You want to look around. You want to, make sure that what your compensation that you're offering your CEO, your executive director is reasonable. And then you want to do the due diligence in documenting that and do the due diligence in documenting the recusal of that person from the decision-making process. You set that, you do those things, hoop, hoop, hoop. You've now jumped through so many hoops, but now the IRS has a really tough case to prove unreasonable and then go after you for excise taxes, which is what they would do, or intermediate sanctions. It's complicated, way more complicated, like I said, than businesses, but it's something to just keep in the back of your mind that each nonprofit organization, no matter what the 501c designation is organized and operated exclusively for exempt purposes. So you have to look at what are those purposes. And the purpose is not to compensate people exceedingly well. Unreasonably well.
Unreasonably
right. You're good. Long-winded kind of answer to that, but yeah, that's the nuts and bolts of compensation.
Well, circling back to the book and then excitingly, the audiobook.
Yes.
What would be, if you could identify the target the person in whatever phase they are in, like who would be the perfect candidate to listen to the audiobook, to read the book? Like when you wrote it, who was envisioned in your mind, who was the perfect person that would be grabbing onto this book and taking it in like a sponge?
Right. It really was you. Or individuals just like you. So really inspired to start a nonprofit, a little bit fearful of the process or just wanting to learn more about the process. And that was, people just like you were who I had in mind when I was writing this book. And the whole intent really was to really point out. So when you said there was a mystery, it's because it's almost like there's a fog in front of,
I was going to say gray area. Yeah, I was going to say gray area, but that didn't really, I love what you're saying. The fog, it was like a mystery fog in between what we wanted to do and where we wanted to get to.
Precisely. And so you know where you are and you know where you want to get, but you cannot see it. It is totally obstructed by this fog, right? There are a lot of obstacles. There's pits, there's traps, there's mountains that you can slam into. And the purpose of this book, the written book and the audiobook and Nonprofit Counsel, to be perfectly honest, is to kind of lift that fog just a little bit, shine some sunlight, lift the fog so you can see where you need to navigate. And you can see that there are also different pathways. So, in our discussion, you mentioned that you thought you would be, the organization would be a 501c3. I think that was one of the initial lifting of the fog because we're like, that's a pathway that isn't appropriate for you. The pathway that's appropriate for you is this one. So there's a lot of those forks in the road. There's a lot of obstacles. And so really that was my purpose.
Well, and I just want to say, outside of being a client and someone who's just such an advocate for the book and the upcoming audiobook, is that I really feel like that it's going to take, your initial purpose is so powerful because you're going to be able to lift that fog. And as a result of that, there are going to be more people like myself who are not going to be as intimidated or overwhelmed. And as a result of that, then the ripple effects the possibilities are really endless, because the ripple effects are going to be that when that fog lifted, that more people will step into starting a nonprofit and making impact in the world. So the whole concept of for purpose, even though that's we're your law firm and that's what its name and that's where it started, now with Nonprofit Counsel, it really expands the opportunity for people to really step into being a founder and making a difference and making an impact in the world through starting a nonprofit. And that's just what I love about this whole concept so much. When you very first came to produce your podcast, and you had just as many questions about podcasting as I had about starting a nonprofit. And I was able to help lift the fog for you in terms of how podcasting would work for you. But I just think that, we are together creating impact and ripple effects that we will never really be able to know. And I think one of the biggest goals for me as a co-founder of a nonprofit was to have a legacy work attached to what I've been committed to my entire career, 30 plus years of getting people's voices heard in some capacity, either through broadcast radio or podcasting, and now through the Podcast Professionals Association. And I just really want to inspire and hope that if you're listening to this episode right now, what I would really like for you to do is to get your book. It's on Amazon. And when the audiobook comes out, I think read it and listen to it, because I'm an audio processor. So I'm excited to actually listen to the book in addition to reading it, because I think you hear things differently than you read them. I just really encourage people to do both, but to do it because you absolutely have no idea how many lives your future nonprofit can touch and make an impact. And I know for us, if we grow industry professionals and professionals are making better podcasts and people are getting their voices out there, they can change the world with the conversation that they're having. And I just applaud you and thank you so much for really being willing to step outside your busy firm, because in essence, that is what you're doing. You're stepping outside your very busy, very successful law practice to make a difference for people, to get them to start nonprofits. And at the end of the day, that's a game changer just for the entire the world as a whole. And so personally, I just really applaud you. And I'm so excited for you that you're doing that. And just yay you.
Thank you so much, Traci. I appreciate it so much. And thank you again for being a guest on the Nonprofit Counsel podcast. I hope it isn't the last one. Maybe we should talk again when we finally get your exemption and you guys truly sail. It might be nice to have a little update.
think we should make this a journey story. Let's archive it through the podcast and we get out, as you can tell already, I will share everything that's going on and be vulnerable and transparent so that people can shortcut their learning curve through us. I'm happy to do that. So if it makes a difference to one person to start a nonprofit, totally worth it.
Absolutely. You're speaking my language. Well, thank you again, Traci. It's been such a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Nonprofit Counsel Podcast. Are you ready to lead with clarity and confidence? Head to nonprofitcounsel.com to find the tools you need to start smart, lead strong, and create lasting impact.